What's up, and welcome to another episode of Movie Pitch Mondays. This is a show where I pitch hypothetical, fun movie ideas. And for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Edward Mullen. I'm an author, I'm a blogger, a YouTuber, and some other things. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about a Miles Morales Spider-Man comic book in a hypothetical scenario where, let's say I get to work at Marvel and they say, hey, you can do whatever you want, any of the characters, go at it. This is the pitch that I would give them. So I heard in an episode of a Kevin Smith podcast where he came to my hometown of Vancouver and was a guest director on this TV show, The Flash, that The Flash tends to have three things in all their episodes is heart, humor, and spectacle. And I like, keeping with H's, I'd like to see it as heart, humor, and heroics. So I'm going to keep that same formula within my Spider-Man story. And, I think when I read comics, I look for really great storytelling, and I also look for really great fight scenes. I don't want two kind of heads talking at each other for panel. I like to see the big splash images, some really awesome fights, some property damage, some explosions. So this story is going to have a bit of both of those things. Okay, so my story starts out, Miles Morales, he's like 16, 17. He's been Spider-Man for less than a year, and he is, in high school. He's like maybe has a girlfriend, or he's starting to build a relationship with somebody. He's friends with Genki, this I think he's Korean, this Korean kid. And there's typical high school stuff. So we open the comic with him dealing with high school stuff, girl stuff, friend stuff, staying after class for detention. Nothing really that exciting. So he's kind of at a stage of his life where graduation might be just around the corner, and people keep asking him what are his plans post graduation. And he always thought of himself as a student and Spider-Man, but he never really considered, what kind of life he wants beyond high school. So, his parents bring it up to him. His dad's a police officer and says, you know what, maybe you should become a cop like me. It's a really rewarding career. And, he's leaving pamphlets on his pillows and all that kind of stuff. And Miles is like, you know what, I got a lot to deal with right now. I'm not really sure where my head's at. What kind of career will I have? Like, will I just, do I still want to be Spider-Man? Will I get married? Will I have a family? I mean, this is a lot to weigh on him, and he's getting in trouble at school. His parents are bugging him. His girlfriend wants to spend more time with him, and he's a little stressed out. Now, he's been doing odd Spider-Man jobs. He's busting criminals, but petty criminals, but so far he's kind of focused on his schoolwork. This is kind of like the beginning of the opening act. So Miles meets this neighborhood kid called Dax Price, and Dax Price is a shady character. Miles grew up with him, but he knows he's kind of into some illicit activities, and he can get his hands on anything. Maybe he dabbles in a little drugs. Maybe he dabbles in a little bit of swap meet Louis, some illegal Louis Vuitton, some sneakers, some streetwear. He's like the go-to guy. Now, Miles ordinarily wouldn't hang out with this guy, but there's a new Jordan that dropped, and Dax is the guy to go to. So Miles is kind of hanging out with him to get the latest, the new Jordans or the hottest shoe or whatever. So he's like, yeah, I can hook you up. So he meets with this other guy in this car who seems like really shady, some kind of like Russian dude. So he's like, all right. So Miles puts a spider tracker on his car, and, he's like, I'm going to keep my eye on him later because that guy looks shady. So, the shoe deal is about to happen and all that kind of stuff. And, later he's like, okay, give it like a couple days. We'll meet back up. I'll give you the shoes. Right. So then Miles puts on the Spider-Man costume and goes out to, Brooklyn. I think he's from Brooklyn, but he goes somewhere to follow this car and kind of figure out, what the operations are behind this kind of illegal street trade or street transaction hustle that this guy's going on. So he crawls up through this this warehouse. He's up the side of the building on the roof. It's one of those roofs where you can like, it opens up, there's like a skylight. So Miles kind of like sneaks in and he's eavesdropping on this guy named Alexei Sitsovich, which is a name that you might not be familiar with. Well, I'll tell you later. Okay, so this guy's a Russian guy. He's clearly in charge of the operation, and he's obviously dealing with more than just sneakers. So Miles is pretty curious to know what he's kind of stumbled upon. Okay, so Miles sneaks out the window. Yes, there's a cat there. So Miles sneaks out the window, and he's not that good at being Spider-Man, so he makes some noise, and this Alexei guy looks up in the corner of his eye and sees him. Miles doesn't know that he sees him, but this Alexei is like, what the fuck? Why is this guy, spying on me? So find out who that kid is, right? And maybe he sees like, Miles wears like the Jordan 1s. So he's like, well, that looks like some high school kid would wear that. So I mentioned the name Alexei. If you don't know, that is the Rhino. The Rhino is a really big rhinoceros character in the traditional Spider-Man series. And he showed up in one of the movies, I think the last movie, in like a mech suit, this like body armor with guns. Showed up at the end. Rhino is generally kind of perceived as a big, hulking, strong, 10-foot tall, buff guy in a rhinoceros suit, which just give him like super strength. And he doesn't appear to be all that intelligent. Now, I would focus this story on the Rhino. And there's a story, if you remember, back in the 90s, the Batman animated TV series, there's a character called Mr. Freeze, and there was a episode called Heart of Ice. And now Mr. Freeze was, typically just a one-dimensional character. Nobody really cared about him. But after that episode, we saw a little bit of his backstory. We see some like emotion behind him. He loved his wife, and there's this really kind of heartbreaking moment in the jail cell at the end of the episode where he's got like this snow globe, and I can't really remember, but something like that. But anyway, they brought life back into an otherwise, boring character. I would want to do the same thing with Rhino. Now, I've got two problems with Rhino. Number one, he's dumb, and I don't like dumb characters. There is an episode, or not an episode, there is a storyline that Marvel did where Rhino has super intelligence, and I think he became unhappy, so he actually reversed it and became dumb again, so he could kind of like this ignorance is bliss, and he just lived a happy life. So I would kind of go, and the reason why he's Rhino, by the way, is because he hooked up with these like Russian scientists who made him that way, and they also gave him the super intelligence. So that's the storyline I would stick with. The second thing I don't like about Rhino is the logistics. Now, if you read any of my books, I write kind of like near future or science fiction, not always, but the science fiction I do write is always kind of grounded in reality. I always try to make it seem like, hey, this could actually work. So I don't necessarily like the idea of a guy who's 10 feet tall that looks like a rhinoceros. It's just the logistics and the practicality of that guy living in New York City doesn't work for me. I mean, how does he travel around? Does he take the subway? Does he take an Uber? Does he get groceries? It doesn't make sense. So I kind of would borrow, this is if I could do anything, I would kind of steal the Bruce Banner Hulk scenario where he can be a regular guy but can also be the Hulk. I would do something similar with the Rhino, so he can be a regular dude but then also can at will become the Rhino. I think that would be a really interesting storyline. So we learn about, Rhino's backstory. This is all opening act, like, act one. We learn about Rhino's backstory. He's got a family. He's a Russian immigrant. He's got a wife, a kid, and he's hooked up with these Russian scientists to make him this like super strong, super intelligent being, and he's running New York. Basically, like, he's got a squad. He's doing all this illegal. He's got like his hands in many different illegal operations from like, I don't know, like drugs and casino and smuggling and this illegal street trade. Like, he's got his hand in everything, and he's got workers working for him, and nobody's really seen him as Rhino yet. He's just arrived to the city, and he's kind of growing his operations. Of course, this is going to piss off the Kingpin, which is a prominent figure in Spider-Man. Kingpin is kind of like the Donald Trump of New York City. He's this big hulking figure and he runs everything. And now this new guy's in town and he seems to be running everything. So it's basically like a giant turf war where, you know, two gangs are competing for a finite resource. So that's kind of brewing, right? Meanwhile, Alexei, aka the Rhino, has sent his henchmen all around the city to find any kind of leads with who this Spider-Man could potentially be. And they've narrowed it down to one school. I don't know how they do that. Maybe there's some data that they look at, like where does Spider-Man tend to originate from? He's probably from this neighborhood, high school kid. He probably goes to this high school, something like that. So these guys in like, you know, they're dangerous looking guys. They're like mobsters, you know, leather trench coats. Well, not trench coat, but like maybe like a leather jacket, slick hair, you know, they're rough European, Russian looking dudes, right? And so they show up in black SUVs with guns and they storm this high school and they take it over. They're like, look, I'm gonna start killing people unless Spider-Man comes out. And Miles is like, oh my God, I have no idea what I've got myself into. And he's stressed out. He's 16, right? And so the school's on lockdown. People are frantically screaming, doors are being shut, teachers are barricading themselves in classrooms, and these guys start like shooting, not shooting kids, but they're just like shooting their guns. Police show up, including Miles's dad, the SWAT team, FBI hostage negotiator, helicopters, the nightly news. Everyone is tuning in to this thing that's happening live. So Miles wants to go out and like, you know, show himself to kind of make the school safe, but you know, he can't necessarily do that. He's locked in a classroom. Everyone's going to know he's Spider-Man, right? So he's, you know, not really sure how to deal with that. So meanwhile, all we hear is like these thundering stomps and everything starts rumbling. Everyone's like, what the hell is that? So like they go up to the windows, they're peering out. The cops are looking over, they're confused. And from around the corner is this giant hulking like guy in a rhinoceros costume, and he's running at full speed, and maybe he starts galloping and he like smashes into a cop car, flips it up with his horn, cop car goes flying, smashes into another cop car. There's like, you know, the base, like the FBI headquarters, they usually have like a truck there. He like plows into that, knocks that over. Police are like, you know, breaking for cover. They start shooting at him. You know, somebody's like, you know, hold your fire, because it's just like bouncing off him and they're afraid that, you know, it's gonna like ricochet, maybe go into school and hit a kid. And so Genki, you know, so Miles is looking at his dad like, okay, my dad might be hurt, I have to get out there. Genki's the Korean kid, is Miles' friend. He recognizes that like, hey, I have to like create some diversion to get Miles out of this classroom in a convincing or plausible way so Miles doesn't expose his identity. So Genki goes, hey, the coast is clear, everybody, let's go. Everyone, we can escape out the back. So he opens the door and like a handful of kids run out, including Miles. A bunch of them stay. Like the teacher's like, no, we shouldn't go anywhere, just stay, right? You know, maybe a dozen kids leave, and you know, Genki maybe is like knocking on the doors. Hey, it's safe to go. Let's go. So all these kids are running free. This gives Miles the opportunity to change into his costume and go fight this guy. So that's exactly what he does. He changes into the costume, swings into action, and as Rhino's turning around, Miles plants 2 feet square in his chest and sends him flying. Smashes on the concrete, skids into place. People have got their cell phones out. They're recording this, and a fight goes down. So Miles, you know, takes care of the other henchmen that were there, wraps them up, hangs them upside down, and he's battling Rhino. And this guy is really, really powerful. And Miles is pretty good at like, you know, jumping off of things and throwing like mailboxes at him or whatever, but it goes kind of back and forth. And Rhino like smashes Miles, throws him into like a parked car. It really kind of goes back and forth. By now, more police show up. They have the Rhino surrounded. Miles is badly hurt. He kind of, you know, slips away because maybe cops are after him. And he goes invisible and he disappears and he goes back to his house. The Rhino, he takes off he charges down the street, takes a left, takes a right, and then he turns back into Alexei, just the normal kind of Russian dude, and kind of blends in and like, you know, hops into a cab and we never see him. So he gets off. Okay, so Miles is back home. You know, he's having dinner with his family. His dad's there, his mom's there. Now he's back in his room. Genki is there. His girl shows up. Everyone just kind of really reliving the moment of the day and thankful that, you know, they're still alive and still safe. And actually, you know what? The girl's not there. Let's say that. So the girl's not there. So Genki, he knows Miles is Spider-Man, right? So he's like really reliving the moments, watching all the footage. You know, there's memes and GIFs and on Instagram and Facebook and of Miles like beating the Rhino. And he's like, oh man, this is so great. And Miles like, you know, I didn't really feel like victorious in that exchange, right? So Miles like, oh, or Genki's like, what are you talking about? It's so great. Check this out. Oh, remember when you did that? And his energy is on an all-time high. He's really excited for his friends. Miles is like not doing so well. His dad comes in, is like, look, man, maybe being a police officer is not really a good idea. This is dangerous work. The pay stinks. You work long hours. It's dangerous. So yeah, maybe, I know I said to be a cop. Yeah, don't do that. So he's kind of had a change of heart. Meanwhile, Rhino is the talk of the town. He's on every news, like globally. Everyone's tuning into this guy. Who is he? Where did he come from? What's his deal? They're replaying footage. They're, you know, running stories around the clock about this guy. He's become like this hot commodity. So Rhino has been humiliated. There's footage of him just getting his ass kicked. They don't show the part where he was kicking Spider-Man's ass. And he feels, you know, he's a prideful guy. He feels humiliated. So he's like, we have to get this Spider-Man. Like, I'm pretty sure I'm kind of in the right neighborhood. But I underestimated him. I'm not going to make that same mistake again. So he hires Raven the Hunter, Mysterio, and the Shocker. People who will eventually become in the Sinister Six. If you don't know, they form a group. There's a few other members, but right now, let's just focus on Kraven the Hunter, Mysterio, and Shocker. Now, I wouldn't do the traditional costumes from like the comics or the animated series. I would do it more realistic. So the Hunter, I don't know how I would do it, but I don't like the costumey kind of superheroes. I'd try to make it like more of like a more realistic. So I don't know. So that's what I'd do. I'd redo those costumes. And I would have Kraven the Hunter like sniffing around, and he's found kind of Miles, and he kind of tracks him down. The three of them track him down, and this is like the end of Act 2. So as the kind of weeks unfold, this is turned into a crazy all-out warfare between Rhino and his people and the Kingpin and his people, and it's like a city under siege. There's people getting murdered. There's you know, innocent bystanders. There's property damage. There's like, it's not a safe place to be, right? You know, drive-bys, restaurants are being blown up. And so Miles doesn't really know what he's gotten himself into, right? And he doesn't necessarily know all the moving pieces. He's not a detective. Like, it would take somebody like a Batman or some like police detective to have like a corkboard and strings and pictures of people's faces. Like, hey, this guy's connected to this guy and this guy's connected to this guy. But Miles is not that. He's like, you know, in the song, you know, the old Spider-Man song, it's like, he arrives just in time. Like, Miles or Spider-Man, like Peter Parker, they just show up when they happen to like arrive just in time. They don't necessarily, they're not following along crime. I don't know, it's hard to explain, but like, so Miles doesn't really know how he fits into this all mess, how he can help. You know, these acts are sporadic and I don't want to say random because they're definitely planned out, but you can't just swing around the city and hope it like happen to stumble upon some Kingpin and Rhino like war clash. So he's not really sure how he fits into all this, and he wants to be a hero, but he doesn't know, every night on the news there's some report of somebody, getting killed, and he's like, well, I can't be everywhere. I didn't even know that was going to happen. So he's struggling with that. So I mentioned, the heart, the humor, and the heroics. So I'd add a little bit more heart into the story at this point where, we'd follow a couple kind of side subplots. One of them would be like an exchange gone bad, and there's going to be like a drop point that's there's a shootout and everyone's dead, and a homeless man like stumbles upon this, opens the trunk of a car, and finds like $500,000. And so this homeless man is staying at like the plaza, and he's eating like buffet, or not the buffet, like room service, and like going on shopping sprees. He's buying like, buys cruising around in a Ferrari. And obviously that's not an intelligent thing to do when you come across $500,000. People are going to come looking for that money. So I think there's like maybe a news story that's on this guy, like, hey, this homeless man just seems to be spending a bunch of money, and so his identity gets compromised. Miles goes, okay, I can help this guy, right? Because he's about to get killed. So Miles maybe helps him, offers him protection, like, hey man, you got to give that money back, and like, we got to put you in hiding. These guys are going to be after you, which is not a difficult thing to do if you're a homeless guy. I'm assuming you could disappear. So we kind of follow that storyline. There's another storyline where a little young kid gets caught in the crossfires and he gets killed. So Miles goes to the family and see if he can, offer some words of encouragement. Maybe there's a little brother of the kid, and he's like, gives him a pep talk, or he sees how, that family, like maybe he can be of service to them or whatever. So we're kind of seeing few of these storylines that are a result of kind of like this city warfare. All right, so melee ensues. The Miles is clearly in over his head. At this point in the story, Craven the Hunter, Mysterio, and Shocker track him down in Queens, and it's a standoff, and they get into a fight. Now, this is like the heroics. This is some really good action scenes. Miles is, flipping around, and like he's fighting all three of these guys at once, and it's like he's really in over his head. So he's fighting these guys, and they're kind of at a standstill. Miles is, bloody and bruised, and like his suit is torn, and he's kind of waiting for round two. Just as like, he's thinking that he's got his handful with these three people, an SUV shows up, and Alexei shows up, and he hulks out, and he turns into the Rhino, and he kind of makes a comment like, this isn't really a fair fight, 4 against 1, but then he kind of shrugs. It's like, oh well. And even if the cops show up, like, what are they going to do? They're not going to do anything. So Miles is screwed, right? The only thing he can really do realistically is go invisible and like run away. But of course, he can't do that. He's Spider-Man. He has to fight, right? So he's standing his ground. There's 4 of them, and he is like all but ready to go to war and die fighting these people, right? But then from the sky, the clouds part, and wouldn't you know, Iron Man shows up. Boom, comes down, slams onto the ground, and then another guy walks up casually, just a normal looking guy in normal clothes, turns and looks at them, and he rips, like, his clothes rip off, and he becomes the Hulk. So now it's like Hulk, Spidey, and Iron Man facing Craven the Hunter, Shocker, Mysterio, and Rhino. And Hulk is the same size as the Rhino, but Hulk is way stronger. He like bats Rhino across the street, smashes into like a building. Iron Man is fighting Shocker. Spider-Man is like battling Craven and Mysterio, and it's an epic battle, and it's going really. This is really fantastic stuff. Then another like 3 or 4 black SUVs show up, and the kind of fighting halts for a moment as everyone kind of pays attention to these vehicles. And so the camera view is like underneath the car. This is like the panel that like I would have the artist draw underneath the car. So you see tire and like the bottom of the car, and then into frame steps like a nice shoe. And wouldn't you know, it's Kingpin. And Kingpin, like, what is he gonna do? Is he gonna like get into a fist fight, like a street brawl? No, of course not. Just so you know, so Kingpin is very well connected, hence the name Kingpin. So he has, you know, cops and city officials in his back pocket. So when he gives the order, the entire like block becomes like pitch black, and he shoots Rhino with a like tranquilizer, and Rhino gets hit, collapses, and you know, Kingpin's holding the rifle, and he's like, you know, this is gonna make a nice trophy in my office, right? And so a bunch of his men grab Rhino, chuck him in the back of the SUV. Maybe he's huge, maybe his feet are dangling out the back or whatever, and they take off. So this is a good time for everyone to take off, like, you know, Mysterio and Shocker and everybody, and Iron Man and Hulk. Hulk is now Bruce Banner, and they're talking to Spider-Man, and they're like, hey man, like, you're not alone, and anytime you need help, you let us know. We got your back. And they're like, hey man, thanks a lot. Because, you know, they saw on the news that this kid is like in over his head. So I think that'd be a kind of really special moment. Okay, so the comic book is coming to an end. We see Miles back home in bed. He's relaxing. He's been through, it's a stressful week. And his girlfriend is, you know, FaceTiming him, like, you know, why have you pick up your phone? Like, how come it's so difficult to get a hold of you? Where are you? I'm coming over. The parents are bugging him, like, Miles, do you do your homework? The dad's like, hey, take out the trash. I've told you 3 times, blah, 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 blah. Everyone's kind of yelling at him and pulling him in like a direction, and he just wants to bury his head in a pillow and go to sleep and put this whole nightmare behind him. So as everyone's kind of pulling him and yapping at him, you know, the camera or like the cell, the frame kind of backs out, and we see like an exterior shot of his window, his apartment building in his window, and it's kind of like the end of that scene. It's kind of like, you know, it's never good enough. He's just kind of saved the day, but people are still bickering at him. So, and he's no closer to kind of figuring out his future or whatever. And then in the closing scene, we see a dark warehouse with like, you know, a light with like, you know, a cone of light. It's Rhino. I don't know if he's Alexi or maybe he's Rhino. I don't know. So anyway, it's either, let's call him Alexi. Alexi is sitting there. He's out of the Rhino kind of situation. He's tied to a chair, and he's maybe got something around his neck. And yeah, maybe he's got like a spike thing around his neck. So if he grows into Rhino, it'll kill him, something like that. And then off in the distance, under a cone of light, is his family, his wife and maybe his kid, and they have like a gun to their head. And Kingpin steps into frame, into the light, shadows, really dope shadows, and he's like, you work for me now. And then boom, credits. All right, so there it is. That's my comic book pitch, the Miles Morales Spider-Man. I tried to have some heart, humor, and heroics. We didn't see much humor, but trust me, I'd put that in somewhere. And yeah, so let me know what you think in the comments below. If you liked it, if there's ways I can make it better, I'm open to it. And if you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to see more videos where I talk about movie pitches, please subscribe to my channel, and I will see you next time.